and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday edition of Point of View, and as you might imagine, we're going to talk a little bit about religious liberty, another victory. If you're getting tired of winning yet, no, they seem to be enjoying the victories that they're racking up, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into Iran, a very good piece by Andrew McCarthy, and we've had him on the program before, but I think he puts that in perspective. Then we have been waiting all week to hear what these two lawyers would have to say about men participating in women's sports. I got a piece by Cal Thomas that kind of starts us off in that conversation. Then, of course, we'll talk about what's happening with Minnesota and ICE and a couple of other topics along the way. We certainly do welcome your phone calls, and we'll open up the phones in just a few minutes. But first of all, Jeff Mateer is Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer for First Liberty Institute. He's in studio with me, as well as Erin Smith, Associate Counsel for First Liberty Institute. And Erin, I thought I'd come to you because the first one is about a settlement for a first responder. A pretty significant settlement, but more importantly, just again, another victory for religious liberty.
Yeah, we were thrilled earlier this week to announce a settlement that we reached with the Atlantic City Fire Department, where our client, Alex Smith, works as an air mask technician. He was requesting a religious accommodation to be able to wear a short beard in accordance with his religious beliefs. And so we ended up taking that case through the district court, lost the district court, but ended up getting a favorable opinion from the Third Circuit, which resulted in us being able to get to the settlement table. Atlantic City has agreed to update their policy and guidelines to allow for religious accommodations, which we're excited about because it just furthers our win in the Groff case, protecting employees in the workplace and their ability to express their religion. Yeah. In addition to that, Alex Smith is we got a $400,000 settlement amount. So he will be getting paid while he's on leave until his retirement. So all in all, a wonderful outcome for a case, wonderful outcome for a great guy. We were honored to represent Mr. Smith. And
you think about that, if you're, say, Muslim, you're Sikh, I mean, you think all sorts of things. I mean, you're going to have certain kind of dress, you're going to have certain kind of facial hair, and you would think that religious accommodation would not be a big issue in 2026, but you'd be wrong. But again, another victory there as well. I want to jump to something else, Jeff, because people that we know and have interviewed on this program, whether it is, of course, Kelly Shackelford or a few other people at First Liberty, or even the county judge in Fort Worth who we've had on the program, all three of them are unveiling the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, we're excited. So, it's a fruit from our victory in Coach Kennedy's case. And we've talked about often here the importance of the Coach Kennedy case, which took out a 50-year bad precedent that misinterpreted the Establishment Clause. And because of that Coach Kennedy case, what we've been telling people since the victory is, now is the opportunity to restore faith in America. This is your opportunity. The things that were struck down because of this it's called the Lemon Test, that misinterpreted the Establishment Clause, because that is no longer the law, and the court is now going to look at history and tradition, then monuments and memorials that were taken down can come back. And so we're excited as we're on the air today that on Friday afternoon in Tarrant County, the Commissioner's Court there, led by Judge Tim O'Hare and Commissioner Matt Krause, voted to erect a Ten Commandments monument that'll be outside the courthouse in downtown Fort Worth. And so Kelly is there this afternoon and gets to speak at that unveiling. And it's living out the victory in Kennedy. So we're very, very excited about it.
Yes. Well, again, Tim O'Hare, Matt Krause, Kelly Shackleford, all three of them been on the program, and it's good to see them together. But we have listeners in Illinois and in Indiana and a number of places in the Midwest, but you especially have a case in Indiana right now, don't you?
Yeah. So we've got, are you working on that one?
I'm not.
So we've got a case in Indiana. Indiana is one of the cases in which a Ten Commandments monument that was on the outside the Capitol was taken down, and so the Indiana AG, with our support, is asking the court to now, in light of the Kennedy decision, that the case in the Indiana case relied on bad law, that's no longer valid. They want to put their Indiana Ten Commandments back up. So that brief, God willing, will be filed next week, and we'll see. Hopefully the court in Indiana will do the right thing. If not, then hopefully the Seventh Circuit will do the right thing, and if not, the Supreme Court will do the right thing. And so that's exciting. And adjoining, I guess I got to get my geography right, isn't Kentucky is fairly close to Indiana.
Yeah. Let's go south.
And
a little bit. You got Kentucky.
Kentucky.
There you go.
Kentucky just I guess now earlier this month, Kentucky restored its Ten Commandments. Actually, and if people can go to firstliberty.org and see the video, it's kind of exciting because it's literally they had put this monument in storage. Right. In a different place. And so they load it up. These guys are loading it up. We have a lawyer in Kentucky, Roger Byron, who works for First Liberty, was kind of there supervising them taking it out of storage, putting it on a truck, and then the truck on the highway, taking it to the state capitol and then installing it at the state capitol. So it's just exciting. It's exciting to see this occurring across America. We hear that there's good things happening. I know we have listeners in Georgia.
Yes.
I encourage them, call their representatives, because we're asking Georgia to do the same. Put your Ten Commandments back. The Kennedy case makes that possible. There's no excuse any longer. The Ten Commandments should be displayed. So that's exciting.
Let's talk about Kentucky for just a minute. I'm old enough to remember in 1980, Stone versus Graham.
Horrible.
She may have read about that in the book,
Horrible.
But I do remember that 5-4 ruling that the Ten Commandments that were posted in the classroom had to be taken down. Now, I've heard they never took it down, but nevertheless, that was the case. And so when you think about the case that was going the wrong direction, 1980, even at that time, you still had all sorts of sort of anti-religious decisions coming down saying you cannot post the Ten Commandments because the fear was the students might read the Ten Commandments, the students might obey the Ten Commandments. Heaven forbid that they might do that. But nevertheless, now we see them bringing the monuments back.
It's a new day. And thank
day.
You, Coach Joe Kennedy.
Yes.
Thank you, Coach Joe Kennedy.
Well, I just thought you'd like to hear about a little bit of winning. And we do have an action item, really, for Georgia, right?
So, yes, an action item for Georgia. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Folks should call their representatives.
Of Georgia listeners. Maybe we could make that an action item, although we really like to make our action items more kind of national. Our action item today, of course, is the repeal of the FACE Act. That's been an issue we've been talking about here as well. And I guess we get that victory in. But anyway, I just thought you'd appreciate some of the victories coming from First Liberty. Let's take a break, though, because Andrew McCarthy, who we've had on before, as a matter of fact, I've got a commentary next week coming out where I've quoted some of the things he's mentioned and explained about Islam, because you might remember he was the one that was bringing the first case against the first attack on the World Trade Center and has really focused on that. But he says, we really have a historic opportunity for regime change in Iran. Let's talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
During this year in which we celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation, we need to remember what the founders said about this country. It will also be important to remember what they said about the importance of education. Mark Lewis writes about the miseducation of America. He is convinced that we would all agree that education is one of the most important facets of any society. Yet we should also acknowledge that not all education is good. If citizens don't know the difference between freedom and tyranny, then they won't know how to protect the former and guard against the latter. 2 Bible verses are relevant. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, Hosea 4:6. My people have gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, Isaiah 5:13. Thomas Jefferson observed that an educated citizenship is a vital requisite for our survival as free people. James Madison warned the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. Mark Lewis reminds us that our founding fathers wanted America to truly be free, free from tyrants, despots, dictators, and power-hungry megalomaniacs that live for their own self-aggrandizement. Noah Webster explained, education is useless without the Bible. God's word contained in the Bible has provided all necessary rules to direct our conduct. Even Thomas Jefferson, no devout Christian, understood the value of the Bible. He said the Bible makes the best people in the world. Today we seem to have lots of knowledge, but much less wisdom. This is due to the miseducation of America and points to the need for us to read our Bibles and apply them to our daily life. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the things that we talked about earlier in the week, because I was quoting from an article in which the individual was saying we're really living through history. And think about that. Even though we keep talking about the first year of Donald Trump, let's recognize that this time last year, he still was not president of the United States. So all of this has happened actually in less than 12 months, almost 12 months now. But when you think about the fact that you had the 12-day war, that was back in June of 2025. That's when Iran again closed down the internet because of the war between Iran and Israel. And then the resolution of that coming when the United States decided to be involved and take out the nuclear facilities of Iran. Of course, now you have the Iranian rial, which is worth nothing, literally nothing, as they were looking at the way in which they were talking about the currency calculation. They don't have enough zeros there to even talk about where that is. The disaster that's taking place, and of course, then the attempt to once again close down the internet, even though Elon Musk has Starlink, they figured out some ways to block that. And so we are in the midst of what could be another very significant change, but we don't have a lot of the facts and figures on the ground. And we've had everything from an estimate of 500 people being killed to 3,000 people being killed. The fact that the range is so great, it illustrates what we don't know. So, Erin, I thought I'd come to you first because in some respects, we don't know a great deal, but what we do know suggests that maybe the mullahs won't always be running the country of Iran.
Maybe not. That's really hard to say. But what we do know is that this is not the first time this has happened. There always is some seemingly kind of unrest in the Middle East. I think the Bible's pretty clear that part of the world will always be, in some form of conflict. But something interesting that I think that this article points to is, there is an opportunity for this regime change, but how involved can America really be?
Right.
We haven't been exactly successful at installing regimes in the Middle East. And so really it takes the cooperation. I agree. It takes the cooperation of the Iranian people getting on board and pushing this across the finish line to swap this over. My question is, what do the other countries, the leadership in the other countries in the Middle East, the neighbors of Iran, what do they think? Are they, I think they don't like the leadership in Iran, but what does a true democracy in Iran mean for the UAE that, does suppress the religious rights of its people? So I don't know what they're thinking. They're not necessarily, I haven't seen any public support by our allies in the Middle East, but you wonder, what else does this shake up if the regime does topple?
Yeah. And I've said before, it's really hard to grow a democracy on Muslim soil, because if indeed you start with a Muslim idea, Andrew McCarthy's piece, which I have coming out next week, reminds us that in countries that have Sharia law, of which most of them do, I hate to say it, but women have half the rights as men. A Muslim man can marry anyone. A Muslim woman can only marry a Muslim. Inheritance, only half as much. A Muslim man has a lot more rights than a non-Muslim man. I mean, you don't have equal protection. But at the moment, anything might be better than the theocracy and the prosecutions and the persecution, probably a better word, I should say, persecution of some of the believers. And one of the fastest growing churches in the world, they say, is in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, we've observed that the church is exploding in Iran under this persecution. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised. That's sort of New Testament, Book of Acts type stuff. I think it's what, and I think the president on this is he's being a little cautious. And boy, when do you say Donald Trump and cautious in the same sentence? But I do think on this one he is. And I know last week I was sort of perhaps some would think fawning over Secretary of State Rubio, but I assume that this is an issue Rubio is also involved in and is advising some caution. Don't just start bombing, just to bomb. I think it's interesting, at least some of the reports are the Israelis are advising kind of go slow, because they're worried that depending on what we did, it would cause a lot of unrest in that region, which it would. And they probably are. I mean, Iran, of course, is saying, if we do something, we're going to strike back. Probably the most likely place that they would strike back is Israel. Or our bases. In the region. So I think that's good. What I think we need to watch is, does there ever become a division between the political leadership, the Ayatollah and the military? Because at a certain point, to be successful, the rank and file military have got to decide we're not going to kill our people anymore.
Yes.
And it is an interesting time that you can shut down the internet and successfully do that. Because if not, then that's a way to get the message out, whether it's 500 or 3,000. That's still a significant amount of people. I mean, think about if our government, if there were protests and 500 people were killed in Minneapolis. I mean, there would be just absolute outrage. Right. And so the fact that they're trying to shut down the social media. Now, we also know word of mouth, and we've had word of mouth for a long time, and it can be powerful, and certainly inside the church sometimes it can be very powerful, but the way the message can get out and spread. So I would watch the military and see what happens. I think there has to be, not that we would support a military coup, but the military has to separate from the political leadership. And I think on this one, again, I think the president, I was concerned when I heard we were evacuating personnel from one of the bases. That concerned me, because that sounds like we're about to do something. But I think we have to be very careful. It has to be a very strategic target.
Well, and again, the target sometimes in the past for him was Qasem Soleimani, who was, again, the head of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard. And I think there are some people in the military that are kind of watching the sky the way maybe some of the people in Hezbollah have decided they don't want to use pagers anymore, because sometimes some of these things do blow up in ways that they did not expect. So you don't think the leadership in Iran is like hiding? Yes.
Because after what happened in Venezuela and the fact that they've actually killed, they're not anywhere.
You do not want to go against the United States of America. And again, as we have talked about before with people like Victor Davis Hanson, where would the world be if we did not have U.S. military? I mean, just imagine what China would do, imagine what Iran, what North Korea, many of them would do. But the world is kind of separating, because you've got Russia and China, North Korea, Iran, and I think there's some people have come up with called creeks, to illustrate that. And then, of course, you got the United States and NATO, as helpful or as unhelpful as NATO is. And it seems to me that the world has really divided up. And I think for a lot of the Iranian people, if given the choice, which did you want to choose? It's pretty obvious what they wanted to choose. Back in the 70s, this was a very pro-American country. When then the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, you didn't tamp too much of that down. And the access to the internet says, we do like some of these things. We'd rather have blue jeans than hijabs, and we'd like to have an opportunity to have some freedom. Even to have the kind of freedom you have in the UAE or Saudi Arabia is better than the freedom we have in Iran. So maybe the desire for freedom, even if it doesn't result in a functioning republic based on Judeo-Christian principles, okay, we know that's not going to happen, would be better. And of course, the greatest nemesis in the Middle East right now is Iran. And if you're Hamas, first of all, they've been devastated by Israel. Hezbollah, already talked about them. The Houthis, they're not receiving any funds from Iran. And so in some respects, just think of how different the Middle East was on October 7th in 2023 and how it is today. And a lot of that has to do with Israel and also Donald Trump. It's just pretty amazing. And I think credit is due to talk about that. Well, I did want to at least talk about one international policy issue, but I have been waiting for days to hear what our lawyers are going to say about the Supreme Court decision. And we'll get into that decision that is coming down. But the real question is, indeed, can men actually participate in women's sports? And will the Supreme Court strike down more than 24 states? Or will they actually inject a little bit of common sense, maybe even biblical theology into this as well? So we'll come back and talk about that. And we'll also open up your phones because I suspect some of you have some questions and comments about that as well. We are privileged to have in studio with us today Jeff Mateer, Erin Smith. If you'd like to know more about First Liberty, firstliberty.org on our website. And of course, all of that you can find at the website pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or Call to Invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you would like to join this conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect you might have some thoughts, maybe some questions. We are privileged to have Jeff Mateer and Erin Smith with us. But the question before the Supreme Court, a very simple one if you think about it. Can Idaho and West Virginia, and by extension 27 other states, define sports based on sex? In other words, can an individual who is a male who now says she is a female or transgender woman, can those individuals actually participate in female sports. The case out of Idaho involves Lindsay Hickox, 24 years of age, a man who now is called a transgender woman, trying to be very accurate here, wanted to try out for the women's track and cross-country teams at Boise State, did not make the teams that did play Cub sports. West Virginia, you have a BPJ, which I found out stands for Becky Pepper Jackson, a 15-year-old who has really publicly identified as a girl since the third grade. And so, again, the Fourth Circuit Court blocked West Virginia's law because it said this was a violation of the 14th Amendment, equal protection, also Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. And so I've been waiting all week to hear, first of all, from Erin, because this issue of men competing in women's sports is one that's been going on for some time. And now the court has taken these two cases, put them together, and I suspect they probably won't rule on it till June because they recognize how controversial it is. But help us out.
Yeah, I think the court's probably going to want to release this and then go on vacation. They're going to want to probably leave after they decide this case, regardless of the outcome.
Yes.
Right. Either way, you're going to upset somebody. But yeah, this is a big deal. I think for any rational person that's ever played a sport in their life, or I don't know, ran a race on the playground, even, you know that there's a huge difference between a man and a woman in sports. I played co-ed intramurals in college, and there's a huge difference between being on an all-girls flag football team and being on a co-ed flag football team. I absolutely took a grown man's knee to my jaw and was just flat on the ground. And you play differently. I mean, they jump higher, they run faster. If they run into you, you're going to be the one that falls down, and that's exactly what this article is talking about. Right. There's a scientific difference. You can go to physics if you want, if you're a fan of physics, and just what happens when a larger object impacts a smaller object. It's just a natural progression. And so I don't have a problem as a woman saying that a man is stronger than me. I'm confident enough in the way that God made women to be. And it's not fair to the girls that are playing sports that have worked hard for those scholarships or those championships to have them taken away because they had to compete against a biological male.
I keep waiting for men playing in the WNBA, because you've got these professional sports organizations that have become so woke. Even on this issue, which to me is crazy. I think when you look at Kerby, when you look at the argument, what kind of stepping back after listening to the argument and hearing the questions, most importantly from the judges, question mark as to Neil Gorsuch, and let's not forget that Neil Gorsuch is the reason we have a Bostock decision that expanded the definition of sex in the 14th Amendment. This case doesn't make it to the Supreme Court if there's not the Bostock decision.
Very true.
So the question, really, when we look at it, the question is this going to extend Bostock into new areas? Or is it going to start to cabin Bostock? Or even perhaps overrule Bostock?
Yeah, let's just fix it while we're addressing it.
I don't think Gorsuch will admit that he was wrong just a few years ago, but there might be 5 other justices who think that. Maybe the first step is to cabinet. And this is a very concerning case because if it goes the wrong way,
I'm with you on that.
Then it's literally opening Pandora's box, and it's more than just men being able to compete in women's sports. Boys being able to compete in girls' sports. It's more than that. And it really will change. I wouldn't want you to go into a public restroom anywhere in the country. I wouldn't want my daughter. I wouldn't want my wife. There's still some cities I wouldn't want them to go in right now. I guess 23 states. There are issues on this, but it's a very important case, and really what's at stake. And so I was going to answer your question, which is yes, that those laws are constitutional, and then just hear what you wanted to say. No, but yes, the laws are constitutional because they should be interpreted the way any law is interpreted, which is when a legislature passes a law, for it to sustain constitutional scrutiny, it's whether or not the law has a rational basis.
Right.
And the standard is basically that, a legislature can't pass irrational laws. It has to have a rational basis. And so here, clearly, Erin's articulated very easily a rational basis. There's a biological difference between men and women. There's also a protection issue, with regard to you're protecting women, and those are legitimate state interests. The problem is because of Bostock, it says, well, no, we're not going to look at because this involves sex, according to
gender,
according to Brother Gorsuch. Then it gets a heightened review.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you have a heightened review, then it can go up to as high as now the government has to establish a compelling interest, and it has to show that the means it's using is the only means to accomplish it. Now, I think
they've got a compelling interest.
I don't think they should apply that higher standard. But if they did,
even if they did,
in this situation, the government has a very compelling interest, and so I think so. I don't, I think they should apply rational basis. But even if they don't, and they apply the compelling interest test, I think that the government should still win. In the argument, I thought the lawyers for the state from the Attorney General's office, both Idaho and West Virginia, did a great job. The lawyer from the Department of Justice was really good. It was an assistant solicitor general, did an outstanding job. To me, the favorite was when actually a lawyer who was representing a lawyer in private practice representing the challengers to the law. Justice, I believe it was Justice Alito asked the question about, what is a man and what is a woman?
Yeah,
they don't like those questions, Kerby, because we all know the answer, but they can't answer it because it defeats their argument.
Let me give it to you real quickly. It's Kathleen Harnett, ACLU lawyer, and Justice Samuel Alito just says, for equal protection purposes, and especially under the Equal Protection Clause, it means that there should be an understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman. They go back and forth, and basically they said, well, we don't have a definition for the court. And didn't we have a senator out of Missouri say the same, have the same kind of circumstances?
This week at a Senate hearing, a doctor, an abortion rights supporter doctor, was testifying, and Senator Hawley, the senator from Missouri, asked whether a man can become pregnant, and she would, and she
could not answer.
And this is a medical doctor who is an OBGYN, and she would not answer the question. She would not answer whether a man can become pregnant.
Ketanji Brown Jackson had a little problem with the question about what it is to be a woman. And Erin, this is just, again, frustrating for any woman out there to say, I know what a woman is. Matter of fact, we've got the Cal Talmus piece here. Standards, what standards? Oh, I don't know why. Let's use the biblical standards, the biological standards, common sense standards. And yet these individuals cannot answer the question.
No, they can't answer the question. It's completely obvious. The answer is completely obvious. No, they can't answer the question. And really, it's another area where, to put on my, quasi-feminist hat, like just as a woman, not as a, angry feminist. This is just men taking over another area for women. I mean, to come in and say that we're just like you. You're not. Biologically, you're not just like us. You can't have children. You can't do those things that God created women to do.
That's why I want the man to go be in the WNBA.
Yeah. Well, maybe ESPN can show us the absurdity
Despite how good
Caitlin
Clark is, a college-level basketball player, male, would dominate in the WNBA.
Yeah.
I challenge you.
And you don't see very many women wanting to wrestle men or be involved in men's sports. So anyway, I do want to give some of you a chance to ask a question or make a comment if you'd like. 1-800-351-1212. We come back, though, I thought it'd also remind us of a case First Liberty had where a biology professor got in trouble for teaching biology. We'll explain that right after this.
It's about time. Last summer, Congress voted to stop funding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Last week, the corporation formally disbanded. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, was a private nonprofit organization authorized by Congress in 1967 as the funding mechanism for public radio and television. The Washington Post's Dominic Pino says this was part of the progressive vision of the Great Society. Indeed, the Public Broadcasting Service and National Public Radio, PBS and NPR, have long exhibited a decidedly liberal political bias and, more recently, have advanced far-left positions on most issues, including gender ideology. Now that PBS and NPR will no longer receive government funding, their stations will do just fine. They fundraise through telethons and on-air messages, really ads, and they receive funds from leftist organizations like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. PBS and NPR had been receiving federal funding through the CPB to the tune of approximately $500 million per year. In the 60s, when the CPB was created, there were 3 network television choices: CBS, NBC, and ABC. Today, there are hundreds of channels available on various devices. According to the Post's Dominic Pino, Americans are drowning in information. Public broadcasters air neither major sporting events nor top 40 pop. Instead, they're giving the people what the government believes they should want, rather than what they actually want. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was a strong voice in the defund effort. At a House hearing, she told PBS and NPR's leaders, "We believe that you all can hate us on your own dime." Mr. Pino points out that private donations to PBS and NPR shot up after Congress voted to defund them. They're still free to serve the Americans who enjoy their leftist take on things. But without the CPB, we taxpayers are no longer required to pay for it. Good riddance. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, we will open up the phones, and I'll take a phone call here in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212, men in women's sports, but broader, as, again, Jeff Mateer pointed out a minute ago, once you begin to open that door for athletics, it goes anywhere. So Erin Smith, Jeff Mateer. But just before I take a phone call, for just a minute, you had a case out of, I believe, San Antonio that... again, it's hard to even say it with a straight face. A biology professor was in trouble for teaching biology.
No,
is that fair?
That's it, the exact case. He had some students complain because they, what's the word they use, identified as different. And so when he talked about the biological differences between males and females, these students in a biology class, Kerby, were offended. They complained. And of course, what did the college administrators do? Oh, this is crazy. We're going to just, no, they removed him from the classroom, and we had to institute legal proceedings to get him back in the classroom. It's crazy. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And to me, it reminds me of the children's story, The Emperor Has No Clothes, yes. Right? I mean, it's just the left in this country is just, it's ignoring the reality that look, a man is a man. It's biology. A woman is a woman. So crazy.
Well, again, let's take some phone calls, and we'll head to, I guess we're going to go to, do we have that? Or it's I thought we had an individual that wanted to speak, but I guess we're still processing. I got 2 phone calls, but nevertheless, let me get down to those calls in just a minute. But I think a good illustration of that is not only that he was in trouble, but you are starting to see some secular, atheistic evolution teachers and professors that are actually calling out the woke idiocy that is taking place right now. So I think it is interesting that once you begin to abandon biology, then anything goes. But I think you're starting to see a backlash of people saying, can we just come back to basic understanding male and female, the difference between male gametes and female gametes, the difference between male bodies and female bodies?
Yeah, I think it's a bridge too far. I think we realize that this ideology, which starts with same-sex marriage, goes to transgenderism, and who knows where it goes after transgenderism. I mean, we couldn't talk on the air. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable talking on the air about things beyond that. But but the transgenderism, because it just ignores just common sense basics, that it's gone too far. And so then you have people like J.K. Rowling. I mean, certainly a liberal, and I know we talk about stirring up a pot, talking about Harry Potter, but you have, I mean, a known liberal who's and other known. Erin, on the last segment, used the word feminist. Other feminists who are saying, no, this is not pro women. This is anti women, and we don't support it. I also think there's also the other thing that's going on is this recognition, and certainly in Europe and especially England, when you have these atheist intellectuals who are now longing for the days of Christianity.
Yes.
And they're not there. They're not Christians yet. Yeah. But they're recognizing, look, we don't like the society we're living in. Let's roll it back to when we had these common traditional beliefs. So to me, it's a fascinating time. And I do think on this issue is actually, in the end, is helping because it's stopping this nonsense.
Well, let me take some phone calls. We'll go to Arizona this time. KNLB and Renee, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, hello, how you doing?
Very good. What would you add to our conversation?
Well, I think I have the answer to this issue with men's teams and women's teams. So, I think we should get women on women's teams, men on men's teams, and then maybe start a co-ed and let them join together if they want and see how that goes. I think that's the answer.
And I think, Erin, you were on a co-ed team, weren't you?
Yeah, I was for the intramurals in college. Yeah, I was. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed my time.
And my view, look, if people want to do that, they should. And people. I mean, the test would be: do people want to? I mean, can you get sponsors? And people will go to the games and people will watch it on TV? And if they do, they will. Obviously, to date, there's not been that interest. And yeah, I played co-ed softball, previously at that level, but yeah, if they wanted to do that, I think that's fine.
Yeah, and again, non-contact, that makes pretty good sense. If you have watched some of those attempts to try to have co-ed rugby in Australia, again, as you pointed out, a heavy object hitting a lighter object. And an example that was used the other day is, have you ever rolled a bowling ball down and watched what happened to the bowling ball and what happened to the pins? Now, that may be an extreme, but you are seeing women getting hurt in those situations. So in a non-contact sport, fine. Again, I still think it's going to be difficult for women to do real well if you wanted to play women against men, say even on tennis. But if you have mixed doubles, we have some examples like that. So there are a few examples, but very, very few. As soon as it's contact, and football and rugby, those are not contact sports. Those are collision sports.
Well, but we even saw that with swimming,
yes,
right? With the whole Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines being very outspoken about swimming. I mean, swimming's not a contact sport.
It's not.
But
it's not fair either.
It's not fair for men to be competing against women. And so contact sports are really dangerous to pit men against women. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're killing competition for women if you're introducing a biological man.
And that's the point you were making because, again, the piece by Cal Thomas, he does quote Riley Gaines in the third paragraph there, or third page. And again, whether it's Riley Gaines, Caitlin Clark, whatever, nobody expects Caitlin Clark to be playing in the NBA. And nobody expected Riley Gaines to lose out. And even when she tied, to not get the trophy. And I think that just gets back to Americans' sense of unfairness. And it just seems unfair, right?
It seems unfair
and dangerous in some cases.
And the mistake that got made is that they started involving parents. They started involving moms and dads that want to protect their kids and want to protect their daughters. And so they never should have gotten this fight in the first place. But here we are. And I think that rationality, I pray rationality will prevail in this country, will prevail at the Supreme Court when they're determining, the outcome of the case that's before them, and that we'll see things start to get set right.
Yeah, it's another matter to pray. I mean, we need to pray for the justices that they have courage. I mean, they know what's the right decision.
Yes, they do.
And we, especially I would encourage people to pray specifically for Justice Gorsuch, that he doesn't let his past decision influence what needs to happen in this decision, because I can't overemphasize that a decision the wrong way on this case would just be devastating.
Yep.
Absolutely devastating.
Someday I need to read out loud or play the clip from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, because I watched the transcript and I can't make sense out of it at all. And again, these are Supreme Court justices, and she even talked about cisgender, which I didn't even know was a word, but I think she made one up. So these are reasons why, as you just said a minute ago, we need to pray for the justices. We need to pray for the individuals that have presented those cases. And so we will come back after the break and spend some time looking at what is happening in Minnesota. What about the rule of law? I want to hear our lawyers talk about that issue as well. And so we'll get into some of those issues. If you have any other comments or questions, we missed a call, as you can gather. But if you still want to make a phone call and make a comment when we come back after the break, we'll pick up that phone call as well. But we need to take a break right now. If you'd like to read at least a few of the articles we've posted, they are there available for you at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jeff Mateer, Erin Smith, and we'll get into some of these other issues in just a minute, but some of you still have some comments about the last hour. So, Kimberly, thank you for joining the conversation today. What would you like to add?
Well, I would just like to ask a question. You know, I wondered, would the government take responsibility for the women who will get hurt, you know, God forbid, temporarily or permanently hurt and injured, you know, by these bigger, stronger, you know, people hurting them, being their opponents and supporting this?
Well, again, we have civil liability, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know how that comes out. I think at the end of the day, the government's going to say, if they're not going to stop it, or whatever, their laws are declared unconstitutional. It's just going to be a question of, well, you decided to play the sport. And it's. So
we've advised teams who were coming up against, and certainly in the private area. So private schools playing each other. Sometimes they're not all Christian schools the way, our type of church or our type, the Christian school that my kids went to, but they would be playing another private school, and the private school, they would find out that the private school has a boy who's playing on the girls' teams. And the advice our advice is don't play them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't play them. And so I think if you play, then that's where the legal principle of assumption of the risk, like if you know that you're playing against. Now, if you don't know, then I think it's a different, there could be some liability there. But if that's not been disclosed, but think of all that would have to be, you have to disclose that you have a boy thinks he's a girl who's playing on the girls' team. So it is a good question, and it's why the Supreme Court should just stop this nonsense.
Yeah. Kimberly, you've asked a great question, so thank you for bringing it to the table today.
Thank you so much. I enjoy your show.
Yes. Well, and I'll get to some other calls in just a minute, but I think it's a good illustration of the fact that if we were allowing people to do something that was dangerous and the government knew it was dangerous, at some point you can begin to see where the liability is. So I understand both sides. You cannot keep holding the government responsible for individual actions, but at the same time, I think you can demonstrate, and boy, if I were a tort attorney wanting to represent some individual that was hurt significantly, maybe a life-threatening injury or one that prevented the career, you could probably play on the sympathies of some of the juries, couldn't you?
Sure. I mean, it's a lot of times in trial, one of the most frustrating things for trial attorneys is it really, really matters who's sitting on your jury, who you can put on there, because whoever can tell the best story sometimes is who will prevail in a trial. And so, I mean, there's a huge question. I don't know who the tort attorney would go after. Right? Do you go after the team that you just played? Were they lying? I mean, I don't know. It would be awfully hard to hold the government responsible for that.
And I'm not trying to encourage it, but I also recognize that we've had some questions about that in some of these other areas. And so I mean, it's just a good question to raise, and I'm glad Kimberly brought it up.
No, I think it's a great question. I think the other thing it raises, and I believe it's the press secretary, the President Trump's press secretary, either today or yesterday, got the question about because there are 23 states that actually it's not they prohibit it, they allow and encourage and protect. I mean, what are we going to if the decision goes the way we think, which is the Idaho law is upheld, the West Virginia law is upheld, it's clear that other states will also pass laws that protect. But in the states, let's say in some of the blue states, California's and the New York's or whatever, what do we do there if they're encouraging? Because there is this concept, at the Supreme Court, well, we'll just let the states work it out. But that doesn't solve the problem in these other states that are permitting boys to play in girls' sports. So, which raises the issues of safety, and then you can have these injuries that Kimberly's mentioning.
And I think your point's well taken, because that was something I was thinking about as well. Even if you get a right decision based on what we are saying is the right decision, and I think most listeners would agree is the right decision, it is only going to be saying that these two states, as by implication all 27 states, whatever they figured out were, that those are constitutional, but it doesn't seem to go any further than that. And that's, I think, another question that we will probably have to deal with in the future. But let's take one step at a time. Well, as we can, we may take some more phone calls later, but I just figured it's about time to get to the issue of Minneapolis and ICE. I'll say to both of you that I am starting to read articles and see comments saying, Minneapolis is probably going to go from bad to worse. And the death of Renee Good, of course, the vilification of Jonathan Ross, and all the others because of the shooting, and just the number of people that are piling in does suggest that we're going to be dealing with for some time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mess, right? I mean, and some of the article that you posted raises some really good questions, and I think are important questions. And certainly, as someone who does believe in the rule of law, I mean, a state cannot just disregard the law. And a state, I mean, there are proper spheres for the federal government. The founders knew that. So it was a strong federal government, but limited. But in the areas that the Constitution covers, it is strong. And so one of those areas is immigration. It's kind of interesting because the left argues like the governor of Texas can't use his resources to address the immigration problem. That's an argument that the left makes.
And the one out of Arizona.
Arizona, the same thing, that you can't, that this is what they'll argue is this is a federal national issue.
Got it.
And look, I think there's a lot of merit to that. Well, they don't want to hear that argument today when they're saying we're not going to abide by the federal law. It is the job of the federal government to enforce our immigration laws. And you can't say we're not going to enforce those immigration laws. And so these crazy sanctuary cities, no. And I think that's another article. We'll get to that soon, right? We're going to get to that. And I have a strong view about that. Shocking, probably. Yeah. Shocking. I have a strong view of that. But my view on this is states have to fall in an area that is clearly the federal, which is immigration. The states have to follow. They can't ignore federal laws. We fought a war. It's called the Civil War. John Calhoun is dead.
Yeah. Nullification.
Doesn't exist. But it's not surprising because the Democrats were mainly the Southerners who opposed the civil rights, who believe in nullification. So this is the heritage of the Democratic Party to ignore the rule of law.
Yes. Well, we'll take a break and we'll see if we can maybe get a better answer from Jeff Mateer here. He's certainly not enthusiastic enough about this issue. What he's alluding to is we have one very good piece on ICE, Minneapolis, and the rule of law. Another one from our friend Kevin McCullough, fellow talk show host. Cut them off now. There's also on no more taxes until the fraud stops. So we'll talk about some of the solutions right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
During this year in which we celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation, we need to remember what the founders said about this country. It will also be important to remember what they said about the importance of education. Mark Lewis writes about the miseducation of America. He is convinced that we would all agree that education is one of the most important facets of any society. Yet we should also acknowledge that not all education is good. If citizens don't know the difference between freedom and tyranny, then they won't know how to protect the former and guard against the latter. Two Bible verses are relevant. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, Hosea 4:6. My people have gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, Isaiah 5:13. Thomas Jefferson observed that an educated citizenship is a vital requisite for our survival as free people. James Madison warned the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. Mark Lewis reminds us that our founding fathers wanted America to truly be free from tyrants, despots, dictators, and power-hungry megalomaniacs that live for their own self-aggrandizement. Noah Webster explained, education is useless without the Bible. God's word contained in the Bible has provided all necessary rules to direct our conduct. Even Thomas Jefferson, no devout Christian, understood the value of the Bible. He said the Bible makes the best people in the world. Today we seem to have lots of knowledge, but much less wisdom. This is due to the miseducation of America and points to the need for us to read our Bibles and apply them to our daily life. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a while, and we certainly do once again give you a chance to ask a question or make a comment. We know this one is controversial as well. ICE, Minneapolis, and the rule of law. We had some problems before with our phone, but I think everything's working fine, and we'd love to get your phone call, 1-800-351-1212. As I mentioned just a minute ago, the next article, which we'll get to, is Cut Them Off Now, and even another one, which we'll be talking about maybe next week, no more taxes until the fraud stops. So there are some people that are starting to say, wait a minute, if we have a federal government, and certainly one thing the federal government should do should be protecting the citizens from foreign invaders, war, as well as from people who come here illegally, immigration. And so, Erin, your thoughts about this? Because this idea of a sanctuary city, this idea that the mayor of Minneapolis or the governor of the state of California or Minnesota or whatever can say, we're not going to cooperate with the federal government. We saw that once. I was around at that time. It's called the Civil Rights activism that took place, and even the idea of bringing in the insurrection movement, although I think now people are not talking about taking the Insurrection Act to be used, but we recognize that when states won't cooperate with the federal government, I think it's back to supremacy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge question of supremacy. Like when are the laws of the federal government, of the United States Constitution going to prevail over whatever a state's going to do? We know that those powers that have, been delegated to the federal government, they were explicitly written down. Those belong to the federal government. We know that in the amendment says, anything else not mentioned goes to the states. Well, immigration and things related to foreign entities belongs to the federal government. So I think it's pretty clear. But Jeff made a point about inconsistency of argument from the left. And I agree with that, because they're really upset at the statement that ICE is going to go door to door, and make sure in these highly densely populated, based on intelligence, seems like there's a lot of illegal immigrants. Where was the outrage when they wanted to go door to door during COVID? When they wanted to go make sure that you didn't have more than a certain number of people in your house doing contact tracing and all of that? There was no outrage when they wanted to come in and do all that. So, I mean, it doesn't mean a whole lot now that you're outraged about this to me, because apparently it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply in some cases, but when it benefits your argument or harboring violent criminals that are here illegally, then it doesn't apply all of a sudden. Or it applies. So I don't know. That's just it's so inconsistent.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I was thinking, and you're closer to law school than I am, but I think the second case, barely closer than me. Thank you. I think the second case you read in con law, the first is Marbury versus Madison, which establishes the ability of judicial review. Right. Yes. I believe the second case you read is McCulloch versus Maryland.
That is correct.
Which says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Supreme law of the land.
And to me it brings up, because it also we and gosh, we want to talk about another controversial issue, but I am concerned about Muslim influence in the United States. I think it's something that we should not ignore.
Right.
But my anchor when I go back to it, and why when I hear about Sharia law and things like that, is McCulloch versus Maryland is sort of my safety net, because Sharia cannot violate the Constitution.
Right.
The Constitution, as long as we hold fast to the Constitution. I think Daniel Webster has the famous quote about it being a miracle, and at the end says, "Hold on to the Constitution. For if the U.S. Constitution fails, the world will fail."
Yeah.
And Reagan quoted that in, I think, one of his inauguration speeches. But I mean, I actually believe that. I mean, that's what, so actually I believe that. And I think part of that is John Marshall, the first Chief Justice. His interpretation. Actually, he wasn't the first. He wasn't the first.
He did unite the court.
He was not the first Chief Justice, but I've done that before.
That's John Jay. John Jay was the first Chief Justice. John Jay was the first one, but John Marshall was let's say in the Hall of Fame of Chief Justices, he's number one. And this decision, just like Judicial Review and Marbury, establishes that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and therefore you can't have state officials refuse to follow it, which is exactly what happened in the South in failing to enforce the Civil Rights Act. And I just think it's crazy that liberals now have flipped, and they're going to ignore the law and be on the side of segregationists and others who didn't follow the law. So it's to me it's another example of it's an opportunity for us to educate people on history. That's right. That's why history is important.
And as what
did Eisenhower do? What did Kennedy do? What did Johnson do? I mean, these are the actions that were taken at the time.
Yeah. And what makes this miracle that started in 1776, that we're now in the 250th years, it gives us an opportunity to educate. And I hope we're educating ourselves, our listeners, but our children, and it's a good opportunity. Good. But I do think Minnesota's a mess. I mean, it's absolutely a mess.
It is a mess.
It's one of the cities I've never been to. I've never been to Minneapolis. I've never been to Minnesota.
Well, maybe don't.
But I don't want to go now. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go to New York. I don't want to go to New York anymore. Because I think New York's headed down a really bad path. I did go to L.A. once. I don't ever want to go back. I got to go to Dodger Stadium, and I'm good.
Let me defend the people in Minnesota, because I have been to Minneapolis. I've spoken at the University of Minnesota. I flew recently into the Minneapolis airport because there was a wedding and all that. And they always talk about Minnesota nice, and they are really nice people. But boy, in that city, you have a very different kind of group. But you recognize that Austin is different than the rest of Texas, and Madison is different than the rest of Wisconsin. And, we go through that whole list. But just before I take a break, did have a leftover phone call. Sorry we didn't get to some of those before about men and women's sports. So, Richard in South Carolina, you have the floor.
Hey, good afternoon, and thank you for taking my call. I'll be very brief. When they have these types of meetings, congressional or whatever it may be, and these folks, highly educated folks, when a female is asked, can you define a woman, and they cannot do it, the next question, the follow-up question should be, are you a woman? And when she answers yes, then have her define by what parameters do you define yourself as a woman? I think that is a great follow-up question.
I love it. I think we need to let Senator Hawley know, because wouldn't that been a great follow-up? Because she wouldn't, can a man get pregnant? I guess he could have asked her, well, are you a woman? Can you get pregnant? Are you a man? And let her answer that. But I think that's an outstanding question. I love that.
Well, again, if you think about that, Marsha Blackburn asked that same question of Ketanji Brown Jackson. So in that case, you had two women, and again, I'm a woman, you're a woman. How do you define that? I mean, and you can't let people get off with, well, I don't understand biology, but nevertheless, that is the case. And I'm tempted to tell the joke we heard off air, but I'll not get myself in trouble, but I think it's a pretty good joke. And it's just an illustration of the fact that people are making jokes about this, and if you don't inject some common sense and, of course, what we would say as well as some biblical theology into this, which is the piece by Cal Thomas, certainly that is the case. But I do recognize that we need to take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls. That was a little bit off topic, but we certainly are going to stay on this issue of ICE, Minneapolis, and the rule of law. And that brings us very quickly to a piece by Kevin McCullough. Kevin's been on the program before, and, of course, he's a fellow fellow talk show host and always writing about issues. And you already probably had a pretty good idea where Jeff Mateer is going to come down on that. But he's not the only one. Amy Curtis is saying, we've got something else going on right now. And one of the big issues the Democratic Party is pushing in California and in New York and a number of other places is what's called the Billionaire Tax Act. And that is, we want even more money from billionaires. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that Mitt Romney was saying, well, I've made my million, so you can tax me more. And we said, well, there's nothing keeping you from paying more. But there are a lot of people now starting to say, in light of all of the fraud that we are now discovering, and we picked up a little bit more. Nick Shirley found some other things that are now fraudulent. There was a graph, which I wanted to put forward as soon as I can verify the numbers, but it seems accurate, that shows the amount of money we as a country spend on interest and fraud, and that amount is larger than the annual budget of every country in the world except China. And so once you start realizing that we spend so much money on interest on the debt and so much money on fraud, and that's more than the annual budget of every other country but China, we've got a problem, and maybe we should figure out how to save money rather than spend it.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I think we've got as many comments and even jokes and stories off the air as we've had on the air, but that is certainly available to you if you'd like to join us. Been talking about Minneapolis and the rule of law, but I thought I'd move on to another piece. Kevin McCullough, good friend, been on the program with us before and probably need to interact with him some in the future. Cut them off now. Now, what is he saying? I put this up there mostly for Jeff Mateer, but nevertheless, President Trump absolutely should end funding sanctuary cities because sanctuary cities have declared themselves exempt from federal immigration law. They proudly refuse cooperation with ICE. They release criminal aliens back into the communities. He goes through and reminds us Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan transnational criminal gang, has had a presence here. We've talked about high-profile incidents in Colorado and many other states, including, of course, Minnesota. And it does seem to me, Jeff Mateer, that if you're going to say I'm part of the United States, part of the, if you will, responsibility of a state to receive funding from the federal government is to obey the laws of the federal government.
Seems like common sense. So I love this. I mean, you knew I love it. Love it. I mean, if you don't follow the law, then guess what? We're not going to fund your, city, or actually, if it's a state, we're not going to fund it. I mean, that seems to be if you want to be part of the United States, and that there's an obligation that you have to follow the law. And if you're not going to follow the law, well, there's the carrot and there's the stick. And so I think let's use every method we can. So Yeah, absolutely. Cut them off.
We had to know that was coming.
Yes,
we had to know.
knew that.
We'd
We knew that.
emphasize,
We
right?
knew
I'm
that.
surprised I didn't see a hand wave with it. But yeah, no, I think it does make perfect sense to use a tool that's available to say, okay, all of these problems didn't come from over enforcement of the law or overzealous enforcement of the law. These are places that, when these gangs made up of illegal immigrants that are committing violent crimes, they talk to each other. They recognize there are places where their crimes can thrive or where they can take advantage. Here's a loophole that we can exploit. I don't think that, I think that, in Minnesota, for example, right, I think the Somalians were talking to each other, probably saying, okay, look at this boon, I've been doing this. And someone else said, well, I could probably pull that off. And so it kind of can spread that way. And the same as the state in, like in Colorado, where you've got, entrenchments. I mean, even here in Texas, we've seen instances where groups are getting together and protecting each other. And so what they don't need is the state to protect them from the federal government. We probably need some cooperation to help kind of root out this violence, because people are getting hurt. People are suffering from fraud and from violent crime. And so the federal government is trying to do its job in protecting American citizens. States are standing in the way. The federal government probably shouldn't be handing the states a bunch of money to be able to oppose the federal government with.
Yeah. And again, he says politicians who championing these policies portray themselves as defenders of immigrants, even as they create conditions that endanger both citizens and lawful immigrants. And he says the gravy train, President Trump has the opportunity and should take the opportunity to end that. And so part of it has to do with the fact that they are allowing individuals to stay in these states who are criminally charged. In case you forgot the number, I'll say it again. 1.5 million individuals already have deportation orders. What does that mean? That means that they have already gone before a judge, probably during the Biden administration, and have been ordered to be deported, and they have not shown up to be deported one way or the other. In many cases, they're not actually in the courtroom as that's taking place. So when people say they're taking our neighbors, they're taking individuals who have deportation orders, individuals who, and if you've looked at the rap sheets for some of these people in Minnesota, these are the people you want off the streets. If they were citizens of America, you'd want them in prison. Since they're not citizens of America, you want them deported. And so that's the first issue. The other that just seems to elude everybody is that if you say that even trying to get rid of these individuals is wrong, then we do have a mechanism by which to accomplish that. It's called the United States Congress. This argument that, well, we voted for Trump, a majority of Americans voted for Trump, but we had no idea that he was going to deport these people. Jeff, do you remember sometimes the president engages in hyperbole? Remember when he said this is going to be the greatest deportation in history? I think most people hearing that said, he's pretty serious about this.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who voted for Donald Trump thought that he was going to, let everybody come in, be open borders. I mean, we know when you voted for Donald Trump or voted for Harris, you knew what you were voting for, and so this is an example where elections do have consequences. And the executive branch is run by the president. The president is enforcing the law, and when these communities release, and you make a great point, Kerby, because yes, they're illegal immigrants, and we often, the left and the mainstream media will have the sob story. They'll pull out the sob story. And yes, there are some sob stories, and you feel compassionate towards. What they don't tell you, however, is the violent criminals that so many of these illegal immigrants who are being deported represent. And so they shouldn't be released. That they should be detained, which they can be detained until they're deported.
And again, what you have right now is, and we've been picking on Minnesota, so let's pick on Massachusetts for just a minute, because you have the mayor of, for example, Boston saying we're not going to cooperate with ICE. And if we come across anybody that is here illegally, has a criminal record, we promise you we will not detain those individuals for ICE to come and pick them up. So it isn't just that we are going to have hands off. We're going to do what we can to actually prohibit anybody from actually obtaining those. We've had at least one judge got in trouble.
In Wisconsin, you had a state court judge who heard of, immigration officials were coming, and so what she do? She helps the person escape, and she's no longer a judge. I don't believe.
She's not,
I think she's no longer a judge.
Things. So again, this, just before we take a break, because I want to get into some other issues, could be a campaign issue. On the one side, I think the left right now and some of the leaders in the Democratic Party think this is the issue. We'll just generate so much anger about this, and we will make the individual that was shot actually be a hero, maybe a George Floyd type of hero or something like that. But I think on the other side, you've got a lot of Americans that have been watching this for some time and saying, we don't even go along with all the riots that are taking place. And if anything, this means why we should make sure we get individuals that really do believe in the rule of law, really do believe in strong borders. And so I think it could cut both ways, but I do believe before it's all through, if these riots continue on, there's going to be a backlash that I think some of the leaders, at least in Minnesota and Minneapolis, don't anticipate right now.
Well, and I think in all our major cities, right? I mean, if major cities, the downtown areas, the central business districts, are not safe, and you don't have people coming into the downtown areas, then those downtown areas are going to die. And we have an exhibit here in Texas. AT&T, one of the largest, maybe the largest private footprint in downtown Dallas, huge campus that's not that old, that they renovated not very long ago. What are they doing? Well, they're moving to Plano. They're moving to the suburbs. And part of the rationale is, for their employees, right?
Yeah.
And so I know that the Dallas officials dispute that. The governor pointed it out. But the truth, it's as my grandmother said, the proof is in the pudding. They're leaving downtown. And this is in Texas and Dallas, which, Dallas is doing better at some of the issues combating crime. But in cities like Minneapolis and Portland and Seattle and New York, and the list could go on. And you think of Philadelphia and Boston, who need tourism. They have to get a handle on this.
They certainly do. And the ones that came to mind are Portland and Seattle, we've talked about, because they've been engaged in this for such a long period of time that you see the hollowing out of the city, and some ideas that led to, of course, there is a socialist mayor in Seattle, too, and a mayor in Portland who isn't declared a socialist, but in almost every philosophy is. And what that's going to mean in the future, you talk about a downward spiral, that's certainly something to pay attention to as well. When we come back, we were privileged to have the other day a guest on the subject of the Christian heritage of America. My last piece by Jerry Newcomb, Tearing Down Our History, gets us back to the Ten Commandments and our history. We'll talk about that right after this.
It's about time. Last summer, Congress voted to stop funding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Last week, the corporation formally disbanded. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, was a private nonprofit organization authorized by Congress in 1967 as the funding mechanism for public radio and television. The Washington Post's Dominic Pino says this was part of the progressive vision of the Great Society. Indeed, the Public Broadcasting Service and National Public Radio, PBS and NPR, have long exhibited a decidedly liberal political bias and, more recently, have advanced far-left positions on most issues, including gender ideology. Now that PBS and NPR will no longer receive government funding, their stations will do just fine. They fundraise through telethons and on-air messages, really ads, and they receive funds from leftist established organizations like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. PBS and NPR had been receiving federal funding through the CPB to the tune of approximately $500 million per year. In the 60s, when the CPB was created, there were 3 network television choices: CBS, NBC, and ABC. Today, there are hundreds of channels available on various devices. According to the Post's Dominic Pino, Americans are drowning in information. Public broadcasters air neither major sporting events nor top 40 pop. Instead, they're giving the people what the government believes they should want, rather than what they actually want. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was a strong voice in the defund effort. At a House hearing, she told PBS and NPR's leaders, "We believe that you all can hate us on your own dime." Mr. Pino points out that private donations to PBS and NPR shot up after Congress voted to defund them. They're still free to serve the Americans who enjoy their leftist take on things. But without the CPB, we taxpayers are no longer required to pay for it. Good riddance. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to hear the interview that we did on Wednesday with Mark David Hall, Did America Have a Christian Founding? It is available on our website, and I do encourage you to get a copy of his book, maybe hear the interview, and of course the 2 guests around here know who he is. Kelly Shackelford, as a matter of fact, when I first got the book, I met him, it turns out now 6 years ago, when he wasn't quite as well known as he is now. I pulled open the book, and the first endorsement came from Kelly Shackelford, and then a number of other people that we know, Daniel Dreisbach, and on and on and on, all sorts of individuals. And of course, now he is with the Regent University and at the Robertson School, and really just done a lot on First Liberty and religious liberty and the rest. But nevertheless, I'll hold up our booklet that we have on One Nation Under God, and we have ones on the Federalist Papers, the Bill of Rights, Constitution, Church, State, and all the rest. But the bottom line is that we have a need to educate the next generation. One of the things that Dennis Prager, who's been in the studio with us before and been on phone, and I would encourage you to pray for him after he had this unbelievable fall and is incapacitated in many ways, but the Prager U has put together what's called a Founders Museum. And this is a traveling exhibit which is celebrating the 250th birthday of the nation. And it seems to me that we should recognize all the opportunities to educate people. I will point you to another website, which is our First Liberty website, RFIA. That stands for Restoring Faith in America. RFIA, Restoring Faith in America. And again, we have a link to that in the past, which you can find, because, Jeff, let's talk about that before I talk about what happened next. And that is, there are just some great opportunities as we started the program today by talking about posting the 10 Commandments, taking the 10 Commandments out of storage and putting them back where they belong. And what you are encouraging is, now that we have so much more religious freedom and we no longer have the lemon test, every state, every city, every community can do something to bring religious expressions back to the public square.
You know, Kerby, for so much during our lifetime, it's been as if religion, and specifically Christianity, but we can say religion generally, certainly Judeo-Christian religion, it is been excluded from the public space. And the Coach Kennedy case, why it is so significant, the Coach Kennedy case says, no, that's contrary to our history and our tradition. And we're going to look at things that are that were at the founding and things that our founders embraced, and that tradition that went on really until the 1950s, 1960s, and then the Lemon case is 1970s. Really, until then, I mean, we encourage public expressions of faith, and what that means is, you know, praying before your city council meeting, praying before a school board meeting. It means having a nativity during Christmas time at a courthouse, and you don't have to have a clown in the nativity in order for it to be constitutional, like one court case said. that you can actually just have a nativity, or you can just have a menorah, that we're not, that religion is not bad. And the Kennedy case changes that. And so what displays like Dennis Prager's Founders Museum shows is we have a rich American heritage of faith. And this is in you just go to Washington, D.C. and walk through the Capitol for 2 minutes, and you start to see that. So the rest of America needs to enjoy that as well and see that. And people need to know there's absolutely nothing wrong with sharing your faith in public, whether that be by speech or by a monument or a display.
Absolutely. I think there was I was talking with Mr. Barton from Wall Builders, and he was mentioning we're going to have to cancel every school field trip to Washington, D.C. because there's so much religious heritage and speech and symbolism that occurs in that city, in every government building, outside of every government building.
Right.
So, I mean, if people are that worried about it, I guess we have to cancel all the field trips. But we know now, right, the court has made clear that that is not the rule that we follow. We will follow the historical understanding of the Establishment Clause, which allows these kinds of displays. You kind of wonder what our society would have looked like today had decisions like Lemon or Stone versus Graham never occurred, had there been a correct interpretation of the Establishment Clause from the jump, right? During that time, would our society, would the moral underpinnings of our society have deteriorated so rapidly the way that it has if we were continuing to have things like prayer before legislative bodies or Ten Commandments monuments outside of state courthouses or, outside of a school or wherever it may be, because there is a tradition that's deeply rooted in the fabric of this country that the things like the Judeo-Christian values or the Ten Commandments were used to be one of many foundations of the American legal system. And it's important to educate kids, educate the public about America's rich tradition, that, right, these ideals, I get on my soapbox about this, the ideals that came that were liberty and freedom and these inalienable rights endowed to us by our Creator that formed the basis of the revolution for this country. We got to remember that, because that's what the difference between America and a lot of other places is. It's not about a shared genealogy. It's about a shared ideal. Yeah. It's about a shared belief in what it means to be an American. And unfortunately, over the past, decade or so, we've really lost sight of that. I mean, kids are only being taught about how bad America is. They are only being taught about the misgivings, and we're not highlighting any of the good or any of the high aims that are included in our Declaration or included in our Constitution.
I just mentioned this article by Jerry Newcomb, who's been on the program with us before. It's called About Tearing Down Our History, and he's talking about one individual that decided to tear down the history. And this is a state senator in Omaha, Nebraska, which is there. And they had the Founders Museum traveling exhibit, and she takes it upon herself to tear down.
But she wasn't trying to damage it. She wasn't trying to hurt it.
She's just tearing it down. She didn't tear it up, but she took it down. How's that for a phrase? And I thought the Nebraska governor tweeted, "Celebrating America during our 250th year should be a moment of unity and patriotism, not divisiveness and destructive partisanship. I'm disappointed in this shameful and selfish bad example." But the point I'm making is, for every one individual that's tearing something down off the wall or wanting to remove the Ten Commandment plaque off of the wall, there are many others that have been trying to do that in the courts. And the good news is you're winning all those victories, and if nothing else, the Ten Commandments are going back up.
The Ten Commandments, and let's not forget the Declaration of Independence is with many
God's
references
to it. Yeah.
And so yes, we need not be tearing stuff down. We need to be putting it back up.
One more time, again, we talked about restoring faith in America. I was just clicking on this while Erin was talking, RFIA, and you got a David Barton Barton piece there, actually David Barton and his son. And for anybody that ever comes to the Dallas area, you ought to think about going to Aledo, Texas, which is kind of west of Fort Worth. And they have a library which is just amazing. I've got a few books in my stack, but they have an incredible history. And of course, go to the National Archives and go to the Constitutional Hall and all sorts of other places. But we're simply out of time. I thank both of you for joining us today. And most importantly, I hope you'll have a great weekend. I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.